Excited, bro. Tijuana sounds like a city built on two realities at once. Curious, nightlife on one side, murder capital on the other. Laughs. That contrast is so insane it almost sounds fake. Serious. But the scary part is everybody there seems used to it. Curious, like 50 million border crossings a year is wild too. Deadpan. That is not a city. That is a pressure cooker with tacos. Chuckles. And somehow people are still going out there to party. Skeptical. Imagine clubbing while your taxi driver is telling you who got clipped this morning. Laughs. That is not a warm-up story before shots. Serious, but that's what hits you here. The violence is daily life. Curious. And everybody's answer to danger is not the cartels first. Shocked. It's the police and government they fear more. Deadpan, which is such a brutal sentence to hear out loud. Yeah, because then who exactly are you supposed to call? Serious, that whole corruption layer changes everything. Curious. If cops are shaking you down, the law becomes another threat. Frustrated. Now survival is just navigation, not justice. Chuckles. That sentence sounds depressing and practical at the same time. Excited. And then you hear the cartels are fighting for the city like it's an asset. Serious drugs, human trafficking, guns, all of it moving through one place. Curious. That's why the city feels bigger than the city itself. Skeptical, like the street is basically an operating system. Laughs. Bro said operating system like cartel software. Deadpan version update includes extortion and kidnapping. Shocked. And the guide was a former smuggler plus a guy out of prison. Curious. That actually makes the whole thing feel more real, not less. Serious, because they're not reading from a script. They're just describing life. Skeptical. Still, when a guy says it's not that sketchy, I don't trust him. Laughs. That is exactly the sentence that should make you nervous. Curious, like if you have to say that, it is definitely sketchy. Shocked. And then the cops can just beat you and take your money. Frustrated. That's not policing, that's organized robbery with a badge. Deadpan government-sponsored street tax. Laughs. Bro, street tax is exactly what that is. Serious, the most disturbing part is how casual everybody sounds about it. Curious, like asking whether people are more scared of cartels or cops. Shocked, and the answer is cops instantly. So that tells you the state has lost the moral high ground completely. Excited, but I also found the smuggling logistics fascinating. Curious, like 5 or 6 cars crossing and making money every day. Serious, that's not random crime, that's an industry. Skeptical. People always talk about cartels like chaos, but there's structure. Deadpan, severe structure, terrible employee benefits. Laughs, and probably the worst HR department on earth. Curious, what gets me is how normal the crossing sounded. Serious. 10 minutes, barely checked, just another Tuesday. Shocked after all that build-up, that felt almost more unsettling. Curious, because the danger isn't always dramatic at the border. Frustrated. It's the invisible systems underneath it. The city looks alive, but it's carrying this constant threat. Serious. And people still have to work, go home, and get food. Curious. That's the part outsiders miss every time. Softly. You can't just opt out of living there. Excited. Yeah, and the interview with the ex-cartel guy was wild too. Curious. He basically described moving from survival mode to peace. Serious, that line, "My life is good now," hits hard after all that. Skeptical. But I wonder how much of that is peace versus distance. Curious. Because leaving the life is one thing, leaving the mentality is another. Deadpan, you don't just uninstall that app. Chuckles. Nah, that's stuck in the background forever. Serious. And then there's the human cost nobody can clean up later. Shocked, people disappeared. People got beaten to death. Whole lives just erased. Frustrated. All while tourists are a few streets away having a great night. Curious, that duality is what makes TJ so haunting. Sigh, one block feels like a vacation, the next feels like a warning. Laughs, that might be the most accurate city description ever. Serious, and the fact they're burning buses and cars in public? Shocked, that is open message terrorism, basically. Curious. It's not just damage, it's performance. Deadpan, a very expensive, horrible announcement. Frustrated, and everyone is forced to read it. Serious. That's how control works when the state is compromised. Curious, do you think people become numb or hyper-aware? Softly, probably both at the same time. That's the scary answer, honestly. Excited, because they're not naive, they're adapted. Serious, and adaptation in a place like that is brutal to witness. Curious, like their normal is our emergency. Deadpan, and somehow they still have to complain about traffic. Laughs, bro, imagine the traffic report there. Serious, I think that's why these stories stick. Curious, they force you to see crime as infrastructure, not incident. Sigh, and that's way more depressing than a headline. Chuckles, headlines at least pretend there's a clean ending. Softly, here there isn't one, just people making it through the day. Curious, that line hits harder when the police are part of the fear. Deadpan. If the cops are shaking you down, who exactly is the safety net? Sigh, that is such a brutal place to live mentally. Serious, and it flips everything because the institution becomes the threat. Chuckles. The most terrifying thing is not the cartel, it's the paperwork with a gun. Curious. Do you notice how people there answer instantly when you ask who they fear? Shocked. They do not even hesitate. They go straight to the police and government. Deadpan. That is a conversation-ending answer. Serious. Because if law enforcement is dirty, every other risk gets multiplied. Curious. And then you have cartels competing on top of that chaos. Like two violent systems fighting over the same streets is nightmare fuel. Amused. Everyone else is basically trying to not become scenery. Serious. What gets me is how normal the guides make it sound. Curious. They are like, morning hits happen, people get taken, then life keeps moving. Deadpan. Just a casual Tuesday with kidnapping seasoning. Laughs. That is awful, but yes, that is the vibe. Serious. It is the normalization that should scare you most. Curious. Because once violence becomes weather, everyone plans around it. Softly. And that changes your whole idea of freedom. Sigh, you do not live freely, you just optimize for not getting hit. Deadpan. Very inspirational city slogan there. Amused. Visit Tijuana, stay alive maybe. Curious. The part about the former smugglers is wild too. Serious. Because they are not theoretical, they are people who actually moved through that system. Curious. So when they say the border checks are easy sometimes, that is not random. Deadpan. It means the machine is more flexible than the PR. Laughs. More flexible than the border image everybody has in their head. Serious. And that flexibility is where corruption lives. Curious. Not just dramatic corruption, but small repeated permissions. Tiny transactions that become a whole economy? Serious. That is why the city feels like a layered business, not just a crime zone. Curious. Human smuggling, narcotics, sex work, guns, all overlapping. Shocked. That is not one underground, that is several stacked on top of each other. Deadpan like a cursed shopping mall. Laughs. A mall where every store is illegal and everyone is armed. Serious. And the scary part is how professional it all sounds. Curious. The guy talking about business like it is logistics really changes the vibe. Sigh, that is what organized crime actually is, unfortunately. Serious. People hear cartel and imagine chaos, but there is also routine. Curious. Routine makes it more scalable, which makes it worse. Deadpan. Great, it is efficient evil. Shocked. And the fact that they mention police beating people and taking money like it is expected? Frustrated. That is the part that makes you lose trust in everything. Serious. Because then even a traffic stop can become extortion. Curious. So the ordinary person is trapped between gangs and state abuse. Softly. That is not a normal risk environment. Sigh. That is a system with no clean exit. Curious. And yet 50 million people still cross there every year. Shocked. 50 million is insane when you think about it. Serious. It means the city is both a gateway and a pressure cooker. Deadpan. Tourist brochure on one side, survival horror on the other. Laughs. That split is so extreme it almost sounds fake. Curious. But that is exactly why it matters, right? Serious. People only see the nightlife version and miss the machinery underneath. Curious. And the nightlife is probably financed by some of that machinery anyway. Deadpan. The bass is louder when the money is dirty. Laughs. That is a terrible line, but weirdly accurate. Serious. I also keep thinking about how young the violence feels in these places. Curious. Like, it is not some distant abstract war, it is everyday streets. Sigh, that changes your nervous system over time? Softly. You stop expecting safety, so you stop acting like safety is a right. Curious. Which is maybe the darkest part of all this. Serious. Not just that people are hurt, but that they adapt to being hurt. Frustrated. And adaptation can look like resilience from the outside. Deadpan. Outsiders love calling suffering resilience when they do not have to live it. Curious, exactly, and that word can sanitize what is actually desperation. People are surviving, not thriving. Serious. The ex-prisoner piece also matters because it shows the cycle. Curious. Prison does not always break the network, sometimes it just deepens it. Shocked. A 13-year sentence for kidnapping and he still comes back into the same city? Deadpan. There is no dramatic reset button there. Serious. Right, because the city itself is part of the infrastructure that keeps people stuck. Curious. And that is what makes the walkthrough so unsettling. It is not just observing danger. It is observing a whole social order. Amused. A very messed up social order, but still in order. Serious. Yeah, and once there is order, there are rules people learn fast. Curious. Who to look at, where to go, what not to ask. Deadpan. Basically a city with invisible exam questions. Laughs. And failing the exam costs a lot more than a grade. Serious. What I respect is that they do not romanticize any of it. Curious. The smugglers are not shown as heroes, they are just part of the ecosystem. Which is probably more honest than the usual crime content. Serious. Because the real story is incentives, fear, and survival. Curious. And once those three line up, the city starts teaching itself. Softly. That is a horrible kind of education. Deadpan. Tuition paid in trauma, apparently. Laughs. Okay, that one was dark even for you. Serious. But it lands because the whole thing is built on people paying invisible costs. Curious. Fear, bribes, silence, missed opportunities, all of it. And most of those costs never show up in a crime stat. Serious. That is why these stories are valuable. They show the human tax. Curious. The part the spreadsheet cannot capture. Softly. Yeah, the part people actually live. Chuckles. And somehow they still have to get to work in the morning. That is the most depressing punchline imaginable. Curious. It also makes you think about borders differently. Serious. Not as lines on a map, but as engines for profit and control. Deadpan. Borders are never just borders when money is involved. Shocked. Especially not when so many groups are feeding off the same crossing. Curious. That crossing is a funnel, not just a checkpoint. And everyone inside the funnel is trying to avoid getting crushed. Softly. That is the whole mood of it, honestly. Serious. You leave with less confidence in institutions and more empathy for people adapting. Curious. And maybe less desire to oversimplify places like TJ. Deadpan. Which is rare, because people love a simple, dangerous city story. Laughs. They really do, like complexity ruins the vibe or something. Softly. It does the opposite. It makes it real. Curious. That's what hit me. The danger is ordinary there. Serious. It is not some cinematic ambush every 5 minutes. Deadpan. It is more like rent, traffic, and extortion with a badge. Laughs. That is such a horrific sentence and somehow accurate. Curious. The police being the first thing people fear is wild. Sigh. When the cops are a threat, your whole map of safety collapses. Serious. Then you start understanding why people trust cartel rules over state rules. Skeptical. Which is insane, but also kind of logical in a broken system. Curious. Did you catch how casually they talked about shakedowns? Deadpan. Like, yeah, sometimes the cops beat you and take your money. Laughs. Just a normal Tuesday in the worst possible universe. Serious. And the scary part is how unsensational they sounded saying it. Softly. That's what corruption does. It becomes weather. Curious. You stop asking if it exists and start asking how hard it'll rain. Shocked. And then the line about it's happening in the morning what? Serious. That flips the whole Predator story upside down. Curious. You think night means danger, but day is when people are exposed. Because routine is when you are easiest to catch. Deadpan brunch hour violence is such a cursed concept. Laughs. No, seriously, imagine going to work and catching that energy. Serious. It also explains why survival there is so behavioral. Curious. Like what roads you take, when you move, who sees you. Softly. Your day becomes a series of tiny risk calculations. Skeptical. And that gets invisible from the outside because the city still looks alive. Curious. That's the weirdest part. The nightlife and the fear can coexist. Serious. Tourists see bars, locals see the machinery underneath. Deadpan. Same street, completely different movie. Curious. And that guy saying he was more afraid of police than cartels, come on. Serious, that is not a flex, that is a diagnosis. Sigh. If the answer is the government, the state has already lost something huge. Curious. But I also get why cartels can present themselves as predictable. Skeptical. Predictable is not good, it just means the violence has rules. Serious. And people will cling to rules when the official system is random. Shocked. The smuggler guy saying barely any checkpoint checking happened was telling. Curious. It sounds loose until you realize loose is how money moves. Deadpan efficiency, but make it criminal. Laughs. That is basically the slogan of the whole underworld. Serious. What surprised me was how businesslike everyone sounded. Curious. Even when they were talking about kidnapping or drugs, it was procedural. See, that procedural tone is the darkest part. Softly. Because it means the horror has been normalized into workflow. Curious. And then you hear the numbers, millions moving through that corridor. Serious. So every institution around it gets pulled by that gravity. Skeptical. Police, buses, neighborhoods, even casual street life. Shocked. The bus burning thing was just chaos on top of that. Serious. That is public terror used as a message. Curious. Like make the city watch itself burn. Deadpan. Extremely effective branding, if your brand is fear. Laughs. That sounds horrible and ridiculous at the same time. Serious. And it forces everyone else into self-censorship and caution. Curious. The ex-prisoner taxi driver part was fascinating too. Softly, people like that become unofficial translators of the city. Serious. They know the code, the hierarchy, the danger signals. Skeptical. And they are often the only reason outsiders survive. Curious. Which is funny because he was a criminal and a guide. Deadpan. That resume is not exactly LinkedIn friendly. Laughs. No, but in TJ it is probably practically a credential. Serious. That is the whole moral mess, though. Curious. The people who know how to navigate harm are often people who made harm. And then the city ends up depending on them anyway. Serious. I kept thinking about the phrase daily survival. Curious. Because that is a totally different lens from crime reporting. Softly. It is less about villains and more about endurance. Skeptical. Endurance can sound noble until you realize it is just exhaustion. Curious. But people still get up and go to work somehow. Serious. That's what destroys simplistic takes on dangerous places. Deadpan. People are still doing groceries while the plot is on fire. Laughs. That line alone should kill the action movie version of the city. Curious. I also liked how the guide said it wasn't as sketchy as expected. Skeptical. Which almost makes it more unsettling, honestly. Serious. Because the threat is not constant spectacle, it is selective. Curious. That selective threat is what keeps everyone adjusting. Softly. The city teaches people to live around the threat, not defeat it. Sigh. And that is a very expensive lesson. Curious. The border itself becomes this giant filter for risk and money. Serious. Not just people crossing, but all the incentives crossing too. Skeptical. Once that many people move through, control gets weird fast. Deadpan. A checkpoint is basically a negotiation with reality. Laughs. That is so annoying but weirdly profound. Serious. And the real indictment is how normal everyone has to be about it. Curious. Not dramatic, not heroic, just careful. Softly, careful is the local version of freedom. Aye, man, that is bleak, but it rings true. Curious. I think that's why this whole thing lands so hard. Serious. It is not just crime, it is a society built around managing crime. Skeptical. And when institutions fail that badly, people build their own rules. Softly. Sometimes those rules are uglier, but they are still rules. Curious. That is the part outsiders hate admitting. Deadpan. They want evil with a clean costume. Laughs. They want a villain and a hero and a police siren. Serious. Real life is messier, and that is why it is harder to look at. Softly. Yeah, and maybe more worth looking at. Curious. Anyway, TJ feels less like a place and more like a pressure system. Sigh, and everybody in it is trying not to get flattened.